the outlaw.
I owe you an apology. You begged for me to.
What happened to her?
Terrible. I help those who come to this island.
It's a curse. There are bad people out there. I'll keep you safe. I'll keep you safe.
What if the legendary Robin Hood's final adventure is nothing like you expected? Today, we're breaking down the death of Robin Hood with hidden facts, crazy details, and everything you probably missed. You're watching A1 Film Reviews, so let's jump right in. The Death of Robin Hood is a 2026 American thriller movie starring Hugh Jackman as Robin Hood. This movie gives a much darker and more emotional take on the famous Robin Hood story based on the old 17th century ballad Robin Hood's Death. It was written and directed by Michael Sarnowski. The cast also includes Jodie Comer, Bill Skarsgård, Murray Bartlett, and Noah Jupe. The story follows an older Robin Hood who is no longer the fearless hero people remember. He is haunted by the lives he took during his time as an outlaw and chooses to live alone, far away from everyone. After getting badly injured, Robin finds safety at a quiet priory. While recovering there, he forms a close friendship with the prioress and a young orphan girl. As he spends time with them, he is forced to face his past, deal with his regrets, and search for peace before it's too late. The movie was filmed in Northern Ireland during 2025 by Lyrical Media and RPC. It had its world premiere at the 73rd Sydney Film Festival on June 12, 2026, before hitting theaters across the United States on June 19, 2026, released by A24. When it came out, the movie got mixed reactions from critics. Some people loved its emotional story, powerful performances, and darker style, while others felt it moved too slowly and wasn't the Robin Hood adventure they were expecting. The story takes place in England in the year 1247. Robin Hood is now an old man living alone deep in the forest. He is tired, broken, and haunted by all the people he killed during his years as an outlaw. Even though people still see him as a legendary hero, Robin doesn't believe he deserves that title anymore. One day, a young woman tracks him down, hoping to kill him, and get revenge for her family, who were among Robin's past victims. But Robin kills her first and quietly buries her. Sadly, she isn't the first person to come looking for revenge, and probably won't be the last. Not long after, Robin's oldest friend, Little John, comes to visit. John has been living under a new name after taking over another man's life. He asks Robin to help him take back his farm and rescue his wife, Margaret, from the family that stole everything from them. The two old outlaws launch one final attack. They fight their way through the farm, killing several men and rescuing John's daughter, young Margaret. But the victory comes at a terrible cost. John's wife is killed during the fight. While trying to stop the enemy from calling for help, Robin shoots a young boy named Henry with an arrow. Even though Henry manages to reach his family, he dies soon after. His death sparks even more hatred against Robin and John. The family burns down the farm and comes after the outlaws. Robin is badly wounded during the battle, while John kills the family's leader. Knowing Robin won't survive without help, John takes him to a small island where the priory of St. Clement is located. There, Robin is left in the care of a kind prioress named Sister Brigid. To hide who he really is, Robin introduces himself as Randolph. While recovering, he meets the priory's caretaker, a man suffering from leprosy. Soon after, young Margaret arrives at the island after losing her father. Hurt and scared, she quickly runs away, but Robin finds her. After realizing she knows nothing about his dark past or her father's history, Robin decides to protect her instead of hurting her. He teaches her how to hunt and helps provide food for everyone at the priory. As time passes, Robin slowly grows closer to Sister Brigid and begins to find a little peace. But that peace doesn't last for long. A badly injured young man named Arthur arrives at the priory. Robin believes he is connected to Henry's family and fears he has come to take revenge by killing Margaret. Before passing away, the caretaker reveals a shocking secret. He is actually Guy of Gisborne, Robin Hood's old enemy. Instead of seeking revenge, Guy tells Robin to leave his violent past behind and start a new life. He also warns him never to tell Bridget the truth about who he really is. Robin eventually takes Arthur back to the mainland and forces him to reveal his real identity. Arthur admits that he is actually Godwin, the last surviving member of Henry's family. Instead of killing him, Robin convinces Godwin to let go of his revenge and return home to the family he still has. When Robin returns to the priory, he finally tells Sister Bridget the truth. He is the real Robin Hood. She is shocked and heartbroken. While treating his wounds that night, Brigid reveals her own painful secret. Robin had once attacked her family years ago, killing her husband and children. For a moment, she thinks about getting revenge, but she cannot bring herself to do it. Later, Robin dreams about little John, who encourages him to accept the end of his journey. Overwhelmed by years of guilt and regret, Robin asks Bridget to let him die instead of saving him. She tells him that even though he caused terrible pain, her life changed because she chose to help others instead of living with hate. Still, Robin accepts that his time has come. Before his final moments, Robin tells young Margaret a different version of his adventures with Little John, the heroic legend that the world has always believed. He asks her never to reveal the painful truth about her father's past. Finally, Robin gives Margaret the bow he made for her, teaches her one last lesson about shooting an arrow, and peacefully dies as she lets her arrow fly into the sky. Casting Hugh Jackman as Robin Hood, Hugh Jackman anchors the death of Robin Hood as the aged, battle scarred outlaw, living in self imposed exile, tormented by a lifetime of killings rather than the romanticized folk hero of traditional telling. The casting announcement in May 2024 positioned Jackman as the central figure in Michael Sarnosaki's dark adaptation of the 17th century ballad Robin Hood's Death, a choice that immediately signaled a departure from lighter or purely adventurous interpretations of the character. Jackman's established capacity for physical intensity, emotional vulnerability, and moral ambiguity made him a natural fit for a Robin Hood who dismisses the legends surrounding him as lies he once told, a man who has buried many would be avengers and now faces the consequences of his violence. Jackman's career trajectory provided the foundation for this interpretation. His long association with Wolverine across the X Men films demonstrated an ability to portray a near immortal fighter haunted by endless bloodshed and loss, a thematic parallel to an aging outlaw whose past murders continue to define and destroy him. In Logan, Jackman explored physical decline, paternal regret, and a reluctant acceptance of mortality, elements that translate directly into the weathered, guilt ridden Robin who seeks death after what he believes is his final battle. Earlier dramatic turns, including Les Miserables and The Prestige, showed his range in conveying internal conflict and quiet desperation, qualities essential for a character study that prioritizes psychological reckoning over archery set pieces. Jackman also served as a producer on the film, giving him additional investment in shaping the portrayal of a legend stripped of merry myth-making. The physical demands of the role further justified the selection. Filmed on 35 mm in Northern Ireland over roughly 30 days in early 2025, the production required an actor capable of conveying both the residual skill of a legendary fighter and the frailty of advanced age and injury. Jackman's history of rigorous physical preparation for action roles allowed him to embody the dual nature of the character, still deadly when cornered, yet increasingly broken by the cycle of violence he helped perpetuate. Reports from the set and early reactions highlighted his transformation into a rugged, unrecognizable figure, aligning with Sarnowski's vision of a revisionist tale that rejects daring do in favor of ultraviolence and human complication. Jackman's presence also carried commercial and artistic weight. As a global star with proven box office draw and critical respect, he helped secure A24's involvement and positioned the film as a prestige thriller rather than a conventional adventure. His performance has been noted for balancing the film's bleakness with the cruel humor of a life left behind and the ghosts that continue to haunt it, making the casting not merely functional but foundational to the project's identity. The choice of Jackman allowed the film to lean into a more introspective and brutal version of the outlaw myth, one where the hero's legend is itself a burden rather than a source of glory. This approach required an actor who could carry both the mythic weight of the name and the intimate reality of a man broken by his own actions, something Jackman has repeatedly proven capable of delivering across decades of work. Jodie Comer as Sister Bridget. Jodie Comer was cast alongside Jackman in the initial May 2024 announcement as Sister Bridget, the prioress of a remote rural nunnery who takes in the wounded Robin and offers him a chance at salvation while confronting her own buried trauma. Comer's selection brought a sharp intelligence and emotional precision to a character who functions as both healer and living reminder of the outlaw's past crimes. In the story, Bridget nurses Robin under the name Randolph, helps an orphaned girl, and ultimately reveals that her own family numbered among his victims, creating a charged dynamic of care mixed with potential retribution. Comer's breakout work in Killing Eve established her as an actress capable of embodying complex, contradictory women who operate outside conventional moral frameworks. Her portrayal of Villanelle combined charisma, menace, and unexpected vulnerability, skills that transfer effectively to a prioress whose faith and healing practice exist in tension with personal loss and the temptation of revenge. Subsequent roles in The Last Duel and Free Guy demonstrated range across historical drama and contemporary material, while her stage work reinforced a command of quiet intensity and layered dialogue. These attributes suited a character who must hold the screen opposite Jackman's larger than life presence without being overwhelmed, serving as a moral and emotional counterweight. The casting also reflected a deliberate gender dynamic within the film's limited ensemble. Brigid is not a romantic interest in the traditional sense, but a figure of potential redemption and judgment. Comer's ability to convey restraint and inner conflict allows the relationship between healer and patient to develop through observation, confession, and the gradual erosion of secrets rather than overt romance. Early critical responses praised her contribution as a necessary reflection of what Robin's path might have avoided, underscoring how her performance grounds the film's exploration of legacy and consequence. Production notes indicate that Comer's involvement helped define the film's tone from the earliest stages. Pairing her with Jackman created an immediate contrast, youthful precision against weathered exhaustion, that visually and thematically reinforced the story's focus on aging, regret, and the possibility or impossibility of change. Her presence elevated the prairie sequences beyond mere recovery interludes into the emotional core of the narrative. Comer's capacity for stillness and subtle shifts in expression proved especially valuable in a film that relies heavily on unspoken history and the slow revelation of shared trauma between characters who begin as strangers. Bill Skarsgård as Little John, Edward Bill Skarsgård, joined the cast in February 2025 as Little John, Robin Hood's oldest and most loyal companion, who now lives under the name Edward as a farmer seeking to reclaim his land and family. The dual identity is central. John appears as a man who has tried to leave the outlaw life behind, only to draw Robin back into violence for one final, messy domestic conflict that leaves both men shattered. Skarsgård's casting brought a distinctive physicality and capacity for quiet menace to a role traditionally played as jovial or purely supportive. Skarsgård's filmography prepared him for this reinterpretation. His work as Pennywise in the It films showcased an ability to inhabit otherworldly threat, while roles in The Devil All the Time, Barbarian, and Nosferatu demonstrated range across psychological drama, horror, and period pieces. He possesses a lanky, imposing frame that can shift between vulnerability and sudden brutality, qualities that suit a companion whose loyalty is genuine, yet whose reappearance reignites the cycle of bloodshed. In the film, John's request for help leads to a farm raid filled with slaughter, the death of his wife, and ultimately his own demise, forcing Robin deeper into isolation. Skarsgård's performance has been highlighted for capturing both the residual bond of old comrades and the tragic cost of that loyalty. The decision to cast Skarsgård also served the film's revisionist aims, Traditional merry men are often depicted as a colorful band of equals. Here, Little John is a solitary remnant whose attempt at ordinary life collapses into further violence. Skarsgård's screen presence, marked by an unsettling stillness and the ability to convey unspoken history, allows the character to feel like a living extension of Robin's past rather than comic relief. His addition in early 2025, alongside Murray Bartlett and Noah Jupe, completed the core supporting circle and signaled that the ensemble would prioritize intensity over broad adventure tropes. The dual naming of the character as both Little John and Edward underscores the film's interest in identity as something that can be shed or reclaimed, and Skarsgård's ability to inhabit both the outlaw's history and the farmer's present gave the role necessary depth. Murray Bartlett as the leper, Guy of Gisborne. Murray Bartlett was cast in February 2025 as the leper, later revealed to be Guy of Gisborne, Robin's former enemy living in isolation at the Priory. The dual role requires an actor who can inhabit physical degradation and quiet philosophical weight. As the caretaker, who recognizes Robin and urges him toward a new life while warning against revealing the truth to Brigid, the character functions as a mirror and a Cassandra figure. Bartlett's Emmy winning work in The White Lotus and earlier roles in Looking and Tales of the City established him as a performer skilled at layered supporting turns that reveal unexpected depths. The casting of Bartlett adds a layer of tragic irony. Guy of Gisborne has historically been an antagonist. Here he is a disfigured, dying man who has already confronted the emptiness of enmity. Bartlett's ability to convey both bitterness and hard won insight suits a character who has watched the consequences of outlaw life from the other side. His scenes with Jackman provide some of the film's most reflective moments, grounding the violence in a shared understanding of wasted years. The physical transformation required for the leper makeup further demonstrates Bartlett's commitment to the role's demands, aligning with the production's emphasis on raw, unglamorous realism. Bartlett's presence expands the film's meditation on recognition and consequence. The revelation that the leper is Guy of Gisborne reframes the priory not merely as a place of healing but as a space where old enemies can meet without weapons, forced instead to confront the outcomes of their earlier lives. Bartlett's measured delivery and ability to suggest a long history of suffering without overplaying the tragedy make the character a quiet but essential counterpoint to the more explosive violence of the farm sequences. Noah Jupe as Arthur Godwin. Noah Jupe rounded out the February 2025 announcements as Arthur, later revealed as Godwin, the last surviving member of a family seeking vengeance for the farm raid. The young actor's casting brings vulnerability and moral ambiguity to a character who arrives injured at the Priory and becomes a test of Robin's capacity for change. Jupe's previous work in A Quiet Place, Honey Boy, Ford v Ferrari, and The Undoing showcased an ability to portray traumatized or conflicted youth with naturalism and emotional clarity. In the narrative, Robin forces the young man to admit his true identity and ultimately persuades him to abandon revenge and return to whatever family remains. Jupe's performance must therefore carry both threat and the possibility of interruption in the cycle of violence. His relative youth contrasts with Jackman's age, visually reinforcing themes of legacy and the next generation's inheritance of old blood feuds. The dual name, Arthur Fregodwin, allows the character to exist in two registers, vulnerable stranger, and potential avenger, demanding precise modulation that Jupe's earlier roles prepared him to deliver. Jupe's casting also highlights the film's interest in the transmission of violence across generations. The character represents the possibility that the cycle can be broken, even if only partially and at great cost. Jupe's natural screen presence and ability to convey both fear and resolve make the confrontation between the aging outlaw and the young survivor one of the film's more charged interpersonal moments. Supporting cast and ensemble texture. The supporting ensemble fills out the world with specificity and local texture. Faith Delaney plays Little Margaret, the orphaned girl who escapes to the island after her father's death and becomes a surrogate charge for Robin. Her casting provides an emotional through line of innocence confronting the outlaw's legend. Robin teaches her to hunt and ultimately leaves her with a bow and a sanitized version of the past, swearing her to secrecy. Delaney's role anchors the film's tentative gestures toward continuity and fragile hope. Jade Crute appears as Wainwright, the young woman who tracks Robin at the outset, seeking revenge for her kin, and is killed by him, establishing the pattern of violence that defines his exile. Clive Russell plays Elder Father, the clan patriarch killed during the farm confrontation. Katie Breen portrays Margaret, John's wife, while Alfie Lawless plays Henry, the boy Robin shoots, who still manages to reach his family with an arrow through his head, a brutal image that underscores the film's refusal of clean heroism. Additional credits include Tabitha Smith as Sarah, Bo Thompson as Hob, Asher De Silva as Moshe, Elijah Angwari as Harry Kinsman, Fintan Shevlin and Michael Hanna as Farm Kills, Andrew McCracken as Henry's father, Amy McElhatton, Maeve Connolly, and Maggie Hayes as members of Henry's extended family, and Richie Wilson as Godwin Sr. These roles, many filled by local Northern Irish talent, ground the film in a specific landscape and community rather than a generic medieval fantasy. The casting directors, Nina Gold and Martin Ware, assembled a group that could deliver both the intensity of the violence and the quieter human details of farm life, priory routine, and familial mourning. The result is an ensemble that feels lived in and consequential. Every death carries weight because the victims are individualized rather than interchangeable extras. The inclusion of multiple generations within the farm family, fathers, aunts, grandmothers, and children reinforces the film's interest in how violence ripples outward through kinship networks, making the cost of Robin and John's final adventure feel concrete rather than abstract. Casting process, timing, and thematic alignment. The casting process unfolded in stages that mirrored the film's development. The May 2024 announcement of Jackman and Comer established the central dynamic of outlaw and healer. A24's acquisition of US right shortly thereafter confirmed commercial confidence in that pairing. The February 2025 additions of Skarsgård, Bartlett, and Jupe completed the principal circle just as principal photography began in Northern Ireland at Belfast Harbour Studios and locations including Silent Valley, Glenarm, and Merlo Bay. The compressed 30-day shoot demanded actors who could arrive prepared and deliver complex performances under tight conditions. Every major casting choice reinforces the film's revisionist thesis. Traditional Robin Hood stories rely on charismatic leads, merry companions, and clear moral binaries. Here, the leads are chosen for their ability to embody exhaustion, complicity, and moral grayness. Jackman's star power is used not to glamorize the outlaw but to humanize his decline. Comer's precision turns the prioress into a figure of equal dramatic weight. Skarsgård and Bartlett transform familiar archetypes, loyal companion, historical antagonist, into tragic, dual natured figures. Jupe and Delaney represent the next generation forced to inherit or interrupt the violence. Supporting players supply the texture of a world where every farm and priory is marked by past blood. The ensemble's collective strengths, physical commitment, emotional restraint, and capacity for ambiguity allow Sarnowski to explore the ballad's darker implications without resorting to spectacle for its own sake. The casting does not merely populate the story, it defines the film's perspective on legend, guilt, and the slim possibility of something resembling peace at the end of a violent life. From the initial star pairing through the careful assembly of supporting players, the choices consistently serve a vision of Robin Hood as a man whose greatest enemy has always been the story he helped create. The decision to shoot on 35 mm film and to favor naturalistic performances over stylized adventure further aligned with an ensemble selected for authenticity and emotional truth rather than pure star power or conventional heroic charm. Production development and pre production project first surfaced publicly in May 2024 when it was revealed that a considerably darker reimagining of the Robin Hood legend was moving forward, with Michael Sarnowski attached to both write and direct. Sarnowski had already built a reputation as one of the more distinctive voices working in A24's orbit, having broken through with the acclaimed 2021 drama Pig and following it with A Quiet Place, Day 1 in 2024. Taking on Robin Hood, a character who has been filmed dozens of times, from swashbuckling matinee adventures to family friendly animation, gave him an opportunity to strip away the folklore and dig into a version of the outlaw grounded in the brutality of the original ballads rather than the sanitized hero of popular memory. Hugh Jackman and Jodie Comer were announced as the leads from the outset. For Jackman, the role offered a sharp contrast to the character with which he is most identified, Wolverine, trading adamantium claws for a longbow and a physique built for a very different kind of violence. Comer, fresh off the acclaim of Killing Eve, was cast as Sister Brigid, a prioress whose identity and backstory the filmmakers deliberately kept vague in early press materials. Notably, she is not a version of the traditional Maid Marian, a distinction Sarnowski made a point of clarifying to journalists. The film's financing came together through Lyrical Media, which fully financed the production, working in partnership with Ryder Picture Company. RPC, Aaron Ryder and Andrew Sweat produced under the RPC banner, with Alexander Black producing for Lyrical Media. John Rosenberg and Natalie Sellers served as executive producers for Lyrical alongside Rama Gotumukala, Sarnowski himself, and Jackman. Shortly after the project's announcement, A24 entered a competitive bidding situation at the Marché du Film, the film market that runs alongside the Cannes Film Festival, and acquired US distribution rights for a reported $4 million. Foreign sales were handled by WME Independent, while True Brit Entertainment picked up rights to release the film in the United Kingdom and Ireland. Sarnowski has been candid in later interviews about the thinkings that shaped the script before cameras ever rolled. Rather than approaching the project as an attempt to recast a beloved hero as a villain, he described the process as an effort to imagine what the life of an actual medieval outlaw might realistically have looked like, working outward from the source ballad. Robin Hood's death, a considerably grimmer text than the Robin Hood mythology audiences are used to. He has said the goal was to inject more moral complexity and grey area into the character, and that many of the film's darker turns emerged organically once he started pulling on that thread. Jackman, for his part, has spoken about being drawn to a script that treated the story as an exploration of how power can be wielded for good or for harm rather than a straightforward action vehicle. In February 2025, the ensemble expanded significantly with the additions of Bill Skarsgård, Murray Bartlett, and Noah Jupe, rounding out a cast built around actors known for prestige television and genre work. Skarsgård from It and Nosferatu, Bartlett from The White Lotus and The Last of Us, and Jupe from A Quiet Place and Honey Boy. Their casting announcement arrived in the same window as confirmation that principal photography was about to begin. Filming principal photography started in early February 2025 in Northern Ireland, a production hub that has increasingly attracted major international shoots in recent years. A press release issued in March 2025 by the Northern Ireland Executive Office, framing the production as a boost to the region's screen industry, detailed the specific locations used, including Belfast Harbour Studios as the main stage base, along with location shooting at Silent Valley, Glenram, and Merlo Bay. These sites, known for their rugged, sparsely populated coastal and upland terrain, suited the film's aim of depicting a harsh, unglamorous medieval England rather than a storybook Sherwood Forest. According to Sarnowski, the entire shoot was compressed into just over 30 days, an unusually tight schedule for a film of this scale and ambition. Some of the most demanding material, the farm raid sequence in which Robin and Little John violently reclaim John's former home, was shot in just 3 days. The production wrapped by late March 2025, with Jackman marking the occasion by sharing behind the scenes photography from the shoot on social media shortly afterward. One of the more notable technical choices on the production was the decision to shoot on 35mm film, a first for Sarnowski as a director. Cinematographer Pat Scola, who has become a frequent collaborator of Sarnowski's, handled the photography. Both director and cast have described the choice to shoot on film as a deliberate one meant to lend the imagery a tactile, weighty quality suited to the story's tone. Sarnowski has remarked that there is a certain charge that comes from knowing actual film stock is being exposed on set, and that shooting on film in genuinely remote, expansive locations help the production feel as though it were capturing something real rather than manufactured. The shoot also split its visual approach between characters and settings. Much of Comer's material as Sister Brigid was filmed along the north coast of Northern Ireland, an area chosen for its more vivid open scenery intended to contrast with the harsher grey palette used for Robin's scenes in the wilderness and on the farm. That contrast extended to costuming as well, with Brigade's distinctive blue clothing standing out against the muted tones surrounding Jackman's Robin. Post-production Post-production work on the film was based at Yellow Moon, a facility in Holywood, County Down, as confirmed in the Northern Ireland Executive Office's March 2025 announcement about the production's footprint in the region. Andrew Monjashin served as the film's editor, tasked with shaping the shoot's relatively small number of production days and its structurally unconventional framing, device driven narrative which moves between Robin's wilderness exile, the farm raid with Little John, and his recovery at the Priory of St. Clement into a coherent feature. Given the compressed 30-day filming schedule, the editing process carried significant weight in establishing the film's slow burn, atmospheric pacing, which multiple critics would later single out as a defining, if divisive, quality of the finished film. Music. The film's score was composed by Jim Geddy, a Sheffield born folk singer, guitarist, and songwriter previously known for solo albums exploring English and British folk traditions, including A Hymn for Ancient Land and Wasteland. The assignment marked Geddy's first time scoring a feature film. Rather than bringing in an established Hollywood film composer, Sarnowski reportedly approached Geddy directly after being struck by Wasteland, drawn to the raw, earthy quality of his existing music as a fit for the film's tone. The resulting score leans heavily on Geddy's folk background, built around acoustic and electric guitar work, atmospheric drones, and a spare instrumental palette rooted in British and Celtic folk idioms described by outlets covering the release as darkly atmospheric and elegiac in character. The soundtrack album, released digitally through A24 Music on June 19, 2026, the same day as the film's wide theatrical release, comprises 14 tracks running a total of roughly 48 minutes. Track titles echo specific moments and locations from the story, including pieces named after the farm assault, the fight with the clan elder father, and the journey by boat to the priory, underscoring how closely the score was built around the film's individual set pieces rather than functioning as a generic orchestral backdrop. The album was made available across major digital and streaming platforms, including Spotify, Apple Music, and Amazon Music, in standard and high resolution digital formats. Released theatrical, The Death of Robin Hood held its world premiere at the 73rd Sydney Film Festival on June 12, 2026, giving the film an international festival launch a week ahead of its commercial debut. It then opened in the United States on June 19, 2026, distributed domestically by A24, with some international markets in the EMEA and APAC regions receiving the film slightly earlier on June 18. In the United Kingdom and Ireland, distribution was handled separately by True Brit Entertainment under the rights arrangement set up during the film's original financing. The film opened on a comparatively modest 762 screens in North America, a limited to mid-sized release consistent with A24's typical strategy for R-rated director-driven genre films rather than a four-quadrant wide release. Reporting ahead of the opening weekend noted that projections had been revised downward as the studio's theater count came into focus, with earlier tracking estimates in the $8 million range for the opening weekend eventually settling closer to $3-4 million once the actual screen count and early reviews were factored in. The film's US release weekend put it in direct competition with several other titles, most significantly the family animation blockbuster Toy Story 5, which dominated the same frame by a wide margin. The Death of Robin Hood also arrived shortly after Jackman's other 2026 release, the comedic whodunit The Sheep Detectives, giving him two films in theaters within a short window of each other, a pairing that made for an unusually stark tonal contrast between a broad ensemble comedy and a grim R-rated character study. Home medias is typical for A24 releases, A home entertainment date wasn't fixed until several weeks after the theatrical opening, and even then, it shifted more than once as tracking coverage evolved. Early speculation, immediately following the film's underwhelming opening weekend, suggested a possible early digital release given the film's soft box office performance, with some outlets floating a window as tight as 17 days after theatrical debut, and others suggesting a more conventional wait until the fall, given uncertainty over how the film would perform in subsequent weekends. The digital and video on demand date moved several times over the following weeks of tracking, first estimated at July 21, 2026, then pushed to July 28, and briefly discussed as potentially slipping to August 4, before A24 confirmed on July 25, 2026, that the film would become available to rent or purchase across major digital platforms, including Apple TV, Amazon Prime Video, Google Play, and Fandango at Home on July 28, 2026, roughly 5.5 weeks after its theatrical debut. That release date placed it in the same digital window as another major title, the superhero film Supergirl, which was also scheduled to hit digital platforms on the same day. As of the digital release announcement, A24 had not yet confirmed a specific date for physical media. Based on the studio's historical pattern of releasing Blu ray, DVD, and occasionally 4K UHD editions within roughly 45 to 90 days of a film's theatrical bow, coverage anticipated a physical release sometime in August 2026. Though no official date, special features list, or disc specifications had been announced at that point. Reception box office. The Death of Robin Hood was produced on a reported budget of $20 million. Against that budget, and factoring in typical marketing and distribution costs, industry estimates placed its break even point as high as $45 million, a bar its actual theatrical performance fell well short of clearing. The film opened domestically to an estimated 2.5 $2.6 million over its first 3 days, including roughly $1.1 million from its Friday opening, which coincided with the Juneteenth holiday. That result placed it at roughly number 9 on the weekend domestic box office chart, well behind the frame's dominant release, Toy Story 5. Box Office Mojo later listed the film's precise domestic opening at 2,867,632 within A24's own 2026 release slate. The opening ranked as roughly the studio's fifth highest domestic debut of the year to that point, trailing hits such as Backrooms, the drama Undertone, and How to Make a Killing, while outperforming the openings of other A24 titles, including The Moment, Mother Mary, and Pillion. Commentators noted that the film's trajectory looked unlikely to approach the nine figure global grosses A24 had achieved with some of its biggest 2025 and 2026 releases, and that a more realistic point of comparison was another moody R rated period piece, The Green Knight, which finished its 2021 run with a domestic total just under $19 million. By the time later tallies were compiled, the film's cumulative box office stood at roughly $6.3 million worldwide, split between approximately $5.2 million domestically, about 82.6% of the total, and just over $1.1 million internationally, about 17.4. Trade coverage attributed the soft result to a combination of factors. The film's limited theater count relative to the weekend's bigger releases, a challenging release date sitting in the shadow of a major animated franchise entry, and a mixed critical and audience reception. that didn't generate the kind of word of mouth momentum needed to expand the film's footprint in subsequent weeks. Critical response, critical reaction to the film was mixed, landing in a middle ground between admiration for its ambition and atmosphere and frustration with its heavier, more punishing tonal choices. On Rotten Tomatoes, the film held a 67% approval rating based on 134 critics' reviews, with an average score of 6.3 out of 10. Audiences polled through the site's popcorn meter registered a somewhat higher 69%. The site's critical consensus characterized the film as trading in the traditional heroics of the Robin Hood legend for a bleaker, more violent take, suggesting that while it could have used a lighter touch tonally, it largely succeeded in its goal of excavating the complicated human being behind the folk hero. On Metacritic, which calculates a weighted average score, the film registered 60 out of 100 based on 35 critics, a figure the site itself classifies as indicating mixed or average reviews. Audience response tracked similarly lukewarm. CinemaScore polling gave the film an average grade of C+ on the Service I to F scale, a soft score that reporters covering the film's box office performance connected directly to its inability to sustain momentum beyond opening weekend. Individual reviews reflected that split fairly closely. Tim Grierson, writing for Screen Daily, judged the film rich in atmosphere but ultimately held back by an overly brooding approach that limited its impact. Brandon David Wilson, reviewing for RogerEbert.com, was considerably more enthusiastic, awarding the film 3.5 out of 4 stars and describing it as one of the more interesting takes on the character in recent memory. Kyle Smith, writing in the Wall Street Journal, praised the film's brutish, tactile atmosphere but felt the sheer volume of violence eventually became a distraction from the storytelling, arguing at one point that there's only so much a film can accomplish through raw savagery alone. Alyssa Wilkinson, reviewing for the New York Times, arrived at a similar conclusion from a different angle, finding the violence, particularly in the film's first half, repetitive to the point of tedium, even as she singled out the cast performances, including Jackman's and Comer's, for praise. Taken together, the critical conversation around the film tended to converge on a few recurring points. Strong performances, particularly from Jackman and Comer, striking, tactile 35 mm cinematography, and a distinctive folk score from Jim Geddy, and a directorial approach, continuing threads from Sanofsky's earlier work on Pig that prioritized mood and moral ambiguity over pace, momentum, or the kind of crowd pleasing action Beats audiences might expect from a Robin Hood adaptation. Where critics diverged was on whether that slow, brutal, atmosphere first approach amounted to a genuinely fresh take on overly familiar material or simply weighed the film down. Reviews number 1. Listen, I'm no Robin Hood purist. I'm more than willing to see a revisionist take on the legendary folk hero who's been portrayed on screen many, many times. Sure, I'm partial to a fun, rascally Robin Hood as embodied by Errol Flynn, or a mature, pensive Robin Hood by Sean Connery, or a surly, vengeful Robin Hood by Kevin Costner. Hell, I even enjoyed Carrie Elwes' parodistic Robin Hood in one of Mel Brooks' lesser efforts, Robin Hood, Men in Tights. So, if director-screenwriter Michael Sarnowski Pig A Quiet Place Day 1 wants to give us a radical version that tells us, as the film's marketing informs, he was no hero. Fine. Unfortunately, the filmmaker is so keen to make good on his premise that the death of Robin Hood becomes a tedious slog. You spend most of the film's overlong running time, wishing that its main character would die a quicker death. Release date Friday, June 19 cast Hugh Jackman, Jodie Comer, Bill Skarsgård, Murray Bartlett, Noah Jupe, Faith Delaney director, screenwriter, Michael Sarnowski rated R, 2 hours 3 minutes Hugh Jackman, outfitted with a flowing grey mane and a bushy, straggly beard that makes him look like a yeti, plays a solitary Robin who's long been separated from his merry men. He wanders the 13th century countryside, always enveloped in mist, of in a severe depression. It seems he is tormented by the knowledge that he wasn't really a hero who stole from the rich and gave to the poor, but rather a ruthless, murderous criminal who apparently had a very good publicist. Robin wants to give up his violent ways, but just when he thought he was out, he's pulled back in by his old cohort Little John, an unrecognizable Bill Skarsgård, who recruits him for one final battle. It doesn't go well for Robin, who winds up gravely injured and wakes to find himself recovering at a remote priory where he is tended to by the kind hearted Sister Bridget, Jodie Comer, intriguingly restrained. Considering that we are talking about Hugh Jackman and Jodie Comer, you might think that a romantic relationship between their characters would develop. But this isn't that kind of movie. Rather, Robin edges toward a kind of moral salvation by becoming a mentor to Margaret, Faith Delaney, here a troubled little girl whose father was killed in the battle, and the young Arthur, Hamnet's Noah Jupe, out for revenge and suffering from an injury that cost him an eye. Robin also strikes up a friendship with a soulful, philosophical leper, Murray Bartlett, covered in wrappings from head to toe, who somehow recognizes his good qualities. Very little happens in the film, and since both Robin and Sister Brigid are quite taciturn, there's not much in the way of scintillating dialogue either. Rather, the filmmaker leans heavily on mood setting, using such methods as a shifting color palette. When some vibrant hues finally permeate the gloom, it feels like an oasis in the desert. Varying aspect ratios, harsh sound design, and a folk music score suitable for funerals. The extreme violence is rendered in graphic, gory fashion that seeks to remind you that medieval England was no country for old men. It's all very atmospheric, including the frequent bloodlettings that Sister Brigid applies to Robin's arm. The camera lingers lovingly on every spilled drop, but the dark, humorless proceedings never achieve the profundity they're aiming for are, and the revisionist take on Robin doesn't prove very interesting or revelatory. And while Jackman brings an undeniable grizzled intensity to the role, his Wolverine is practically a cut up. By comparison, the performance is so off putting that you never engage with the character. I'm tired, Robin proclaims early on. By the time the film ends, you'll feel exhausted as well. Number 2. In the opening moments of Michael Sarnowski's The Death of Robin Hood, Hugh Jackman's Robin shelters on a cold and desolate peatland. A young attacker, Jade Crute, emerges from the dark emptiness beyond his campfire. He grabs her, tells her it was a mistake to bathe, he could smell her downwind. Then he puts a knife through her skull. Oody lally, golly, what a day. Whichever version of Robin Hood is your favorite, three cheers for the 1973 animated Disney one. The story takes a beating in The Death of Robin Hood. There are no knights in shining armor, there are no merry men, there is absolutely no swashbuckling. Sarnowski, the director of the excellent Nicolas Cage thriller Pig and sci fi sequel, A Quiet Place, Day One, has sapped every bit of daring do from the folk hero. It's a thoughtful inversion of myth, with some compelling ideas about the nature of storytelling. But it's a total slog. The death of Robin Hood drains the blood and life out of an old English legend. So forget about robbing from the rich and stealing from the poor. This Robin is a grizzled marauder who can't even remember how many people he's killed. We are, to say the least, very, very far from men in tights. This is to a purpose in Sarnowski's film, which, like Robert Eggers' The Northman and David Lowery's The Green Knight, brings a primal realism to an old legend. As much as we might think of Errol Flynn or Kevin Costner, the origins of the story of Robin Hood weren't so cheery. Robin Hood began as an oral tale dating back to the 12th century. A few hundred years later, the first written accounts were ballads. Sarnowski's film takes its title from one of those ballads in which Robin Hood, long before there was any Maid Marian to speak of, was a mere yeoman. Only as the centuries wore on did Robin Hood gradually accrue the trappings of Sir Robin of Locksley. There might have been a compelling movie to be made from those early fragmented origins. The death of Robin Hood instead expends too much of its energy rubbing our face in the muck. Mud cakes the movie's first half, which so strenuously insists on its revisionist approach that it quickly turns tiresome. Jackman, weathered and bearded, looks amazing, like a medieval Santa Claus. And so does the movie, shot across rugged, windswept Northern Ireland vistas by cinematographer Patrick Scola. Robin himself appears weighed down by the mythology around him. He doesn't use the name and calls the rumors about him lies upon lies, but others are buoyed by it. Little John, Bill Skarsgård, is no great friend but a reluctant companion for Robin. He listens to Little John talk up a new scheme as a good adventure shortly before Little John beats a man to death for bread. The battle that follows, a muddy and mean scrum, is even more ghastly, partly for its utter pointlessness. This great disparity between reality and story, truth and history, takes on new dimensions when Robin clandestinely takes refuge at an island priory where Sister Bridget, Jodie Comer, tends to his wounds. He is sheltering Little John's daughter, Margaret Faith Delaney, but their secret past is quietly threatened with the arrival of a young man, Noah Jupe, whose maimed, bandaged face evidences a recent run in with Robin and Little John. Robin's coldness and cruelty begins to melt away thanks to Sister Brigid and the peaceful life he finds there. If Story had previously been a yoke around his neck, Robin realizes another purpose when he considers Margaret's future. In a way, the death of Robin Hood is an appropriately contemporary version of a much retold story, suited to a time when lies and denial of history ruled the day. But the oppressive dourness and forced cynicism of the films suffocate the characters in a way that feels no more realistic than Mel Brooks' 1993 parody. The result, while admirably considered, is almost comically misjudged, like insisting Paddington the Bear sits on a throne of lies. In the end, the death of Robin Hood ironically supports an old movie axiom: print the legend. The death of Robin Hood, an A24 release in theaters Friday, is rated R by the Motion Picture Association for strong bloody violence. Runtime 123 minutes, 2 stars out of 4. Number 3. There are no merry men to be found in the death of Robin Hood, an elegiac portrait of the famed folk hero that eventually delivers on its title, but not before an extended bout of myth busting and moral reckoning. Following a dip into studio franchise waters with A Quiet Place, Day One 2 years ago, the third feature from writer director Michael Sarnowski sees him returning to the intimate scope and melancholic timbre of his debut Pig. This despite story material far more accustomed to blockbuster treatment on screen. Starring a Gandalf coiffed Hugh Jackman as a battle worn Robin Hood, weary of his heroic reputation, Sanofsky's revisionist interpretation dares to suggest that his life of crime wasn't in fact charitably motivated. His quest here is an interior one to salvage his soul from the lie he's been living. The result is pensive, sensitive, and brassingly low on daring do, though it's also a little one note. Sarnowski dramatizes the legend with keen attention to historic and atmospheric detail and a studious interest in how stories are told and retold through time. But the sad smallnesses or small sadness of the story it settles on instead is both the point of the exercise and a slow, steady downer from the get go. Beautifully shot and designed in a full rainbow of earth and stone and sackcloth, and performed with grace and conviction by Jackman and a well chosen ensemble, including Jodie Comer as a stoic abbess nursing our man, if not to health, at least to peace. This is a production of unimpeachable integrity and intelligence, and a commendably mature bit of summer counter programming from distributor A24, but it almost wears its dourness as a badge of honor. The Death of Robin Hood is actually the second film to take as its inspiration an alternate narrative from the ancient ballad A Guest of Robin Hood, which concluded with the aging hero in the care of a murderous prioress finally meeting his maker at her hands. Richard Lester's 1976 Robin and Marian redesigned the story as a bittersweet autumn year's love story, conflating the roles of the prioress and maid Marian. Sarnowski's version likewise recasts the female character as a benevolent force and is largely stripped of romance, though permits itself a streak of sentimentality in a subplot concerning the grizzled outlaw's gentle bond with a young girl. The predominantly stern tone of proceedings is established, however, by an opening sequence that introduces Robin as a lone wolf nomad living off what little the land has to offer after years of war and pillaging, and briefly sharing fire and food with a young female drifter, Jade Groot, from last year's rabbit trap before stabbing her in the head. The year is 1247, seemingly empty word of his heroic goodness has long passed into local lore, and all the wrecked and wanton killer now wants is a right death. Before that can happen, however, he is roped into one final skirmish. He is unexpectedly visited by Little John, Bill Skarsgård, once one of his underage criminal accomplices, and asked to help defend the younger man's family and homestead from vengeful past foes. The conflict that ensues is startling in the intensity of its violence. As bodies brawl and break in the mud, flaming torches are taken to the face, and red hot blades are seared into flesh. Sarnowski initially seems to be pursuing a kind of fever dream hellishness akin to the battle scenes of Robert Eggers' The Northman. Though bloodthirsty thrill seekers would be advised to load up on the film's first half hour, there's a marked shift in mood, rhythm, and volume once Robin, left brutally wounded and unconscious in the clash, wakes up in the serene priory overseen by Sister Brigid Comer, who has opened its doors to all left alone and unsheltered in this ongoing climate of terror. Among his fellow residents are a masked, unnamed leper, Murray Bartlett, whose sanguine acceptance of his misfortune sets the tone for Robin's own spiritual self confrontation. Arthur Noah Jupe, grievously injured in the same battle and reluctantly tasked with revenge on the shattered outlaw, and Margaret, delicate newcomer Faith Delaney, newly orphaned daughter of Little John, who attaches herself to him with vulnerable need. What ensues is a quiet, pained series of conciliatory encounters between these variously damaged individuals, each chasing some manner of healing and redemption, and in Robin's case, a last ditch narrowing of the chasm between the man he is and the man others believe him to be. It's an ambitiously internal narrative arc, traced more through conversation and observation than overt incident, and Sarnowski's script is loath to force undue tension between its characters, while Robin and Brigitte's bond is left nobly platonic. But it's only an intermittently compelling tale, given the consistent tenor of Robin's jaded self loathing and the portentous inevitability of his fate. The dissonance between the human hearts presented here and the dashing, green clad adventurer of old is striking. But despite the haunted solemnity of Jackman's performance, the character remains slender and unknowable, and our interest in the rightness or otherwise of his death is more theoretical than deeply felt. Still, after his proficient but compromised feeling, Quiet Place prequel, where you could sense the friction between the director's humanity and the grind of genre machinery, Sarnowski's latest is an altogether more confident statement of intent, interests, and identity from the richly overcast 35 mm textures of Pat Scola cinematography to the sometimes lilting formality of the dialogue. The death of Robin Hood holds our attention for the sheer severity of its reinvention, the rooted Hessian Rue vividness of its ruined world, and its earnest, complex preoccupation with matters of the soul, a vanishingly rare virtue in the multiplex in general, let alone in the realm of endlessly repurposed IP. The Death of Robin Hood review, Hugh Jackman and Michael Sarnowski make a grizzled, anguished anti hero of the valiant outlaw number 4. The Death of Robin Hood will be released in theaters on June 19. Robin Hood and Little John murdering through the forest. Oody lally, golly, what a sleigh. That's basically the death of Robin Hood in a nutshell. While its gloomy visuals, gory kills, and sharp performances impress, writer director Michael Sanowski's cerebral, artsy drama will likely appeal more to medieval folklore scholars and fans of gritty period pieces than general audiences expecting a more traditional escapist Robin Hood movie. The story draws its inspiration from the medieval ballad A Jest of Robin Hood, the last section of which is titled Death of Robin Hood, where the outlaw visits the prioress of Kirklees. The ailing Robin goes there for treatment because the prioress is his kin, but she and her lover are actually plotting to kill him. Sanowski's film keeps the idea of Robin Hood going to a priory for healing, but otherwise reworks and demystifies the entire legend of the English folk hero. This Robin Hood, played with solemn intensity by a never harrier Hugh Jackman, is no altruistic hero, but rather a vicious, thieving nomad who freely admits that all the stories about him are myths, most of which don't even have a kernel of truth to them. There was never a Maid Marian. He robbed from the rich and the poor alike, and he killed women and children like Unforgiven's William Money. Jackman's Robin Hood is a grizzled killer haunted by an unimaginably violent past that continues to chase him. He's killed so many people over the years that there is always someone's relative hunting him down, no matter how far in the hills he hides, to avenge their fallen loved one. Robin is old and tired, and frankly, death would be a gift, yet he keeps killing those who pursue him. Despite the bouts of sudden and often senseless violence, there's a haunting silence that permeates the entire film, an audible loneliness, if you will, that captures Robin's isolation from the society he's wronged. The only member of the merry men who appears in this film is Little John, a barely recognizable Bill Skarsgård, employing yet another of his signature weird guttural voices. It's been many years since Robin and Little John last saw each other, with the latter living a relatively content life under an assumed name with a wife and child who are unaware of his wicked past. Now his family are in peril, so Little John enlists the aid of his former leader and surrogate father figure to save them and exact vengeance. Both men end up getting far more than they bargained for, with Robin suffering grave injuries in the ensuing battle. In order to save his life, Little John delivers Robin to the film's version of the Priory from a guest of Robin Hood, whose prioress is renowned for her healing abilities. The prioress, Sister Brigid Jodie Calmer, at her most tender, nurses Robin's wounds, but the longer he stays there and becomes acquainted with its community, the more his soul might be rehabilitated as well. There's a stillness to both Sister Bridget and to the Priory itself that lends an appropriate serenity to this portion of the film where Robin tries to reclaim his humanity. Robin's bond with Sister Bridget and a traumatized little girl named Margaret, a compelling Faith Delaney, is the emotional crux of the film and is its most effective and rewarding aspect, lending a much needed humanity to an otherwise savage and seemingly irredeemable Robin Hood. Robin also has a compelling friendship with an enigmatic leper, a moving Murray Bartlett who barely ever shows his face, who also helps the outlaw inch closer to the light. The death of Robin Hood ably mixes the meditative myth busting of Unforgiven, the medieval ultra violence of the Northman, and the dreary Celtic aesthetic of the Green Knight. Yet the film also benefits to a large degree from the enduring memory of Jackman's other better violent badass cursed by his past film, Logan, a comparison Sarnowski understands people will make. Instead of adamantium claws, he uses a knife and a bow and arrow to eviscerate his foes. While that doesn't diminish Jackman's performance as Robin Hood, I could never quite shake the knowledge that I've seen him do this all before. The brooding pace and relative silence that characterize writer director Michael Sarnowski's The Death of Robin Hood is more evocative of his standout debut film Pig than it is his far more mainstream A Quiet Place. Day 1, making this elegiac but brutal period piece his most niche and least accessible film yet. Still, its heady mix of mournful drama and murderous action certainly distinguish it from the litany of other Robin Hood films in existence. Number 5. The Death of Robin Hood is a difficult pill to swallow. For most of us, the idea of Robin Hood evokes spectacle and adventure. He is the archery equivalent of King Arthur, supplying action, adventure, and a sense of nobilism. With a filmmaker like Michael Sarnowski, the director of Pig, one of the most sincere films about empathy, one might expect the death of Robin Hood to have an uplifting tone even in the face of a possible character death. Well, book an appointment with your therapist because the death of Robin Hood is here to leave behind some scars. Sarnowski's film is relentlessly dark. And I do mean midnight during a lunar eclipse on the eve of Satan's return dark. It is unlike any Robin Hood portrayal we have seen, dismantling the familiar valiant ideas of the outlaw. But with Sarnowski, there are moments of reward if one survives the ruthlessly bleak opening. What is the death of Robin Hood about? Written and directed by Sarnowski, the film centers on an old, withered Robin Hood, Hugh Jackman, who sports a majestic grey beard and quietly lives off grid in the mountains. The alleged real life legend says that Robin's final days took place in West Yorkshire, England. But here, Robin appears to be in as quiet isolation in the mountains of Ireland. The film immediately sets the tone for how brutal it will become. A young drifter comes across Robin, who turns out to be a young girl. She tries to attack Robin while sleeping, and he defends himself by knifing her in the neck with a ferocious finishing blow to the temple. And that is merely the opening sequence to Sarnowski's vision of Robin Hood. The film then introduces the viewer to an amazingly realized Bill Skarsgård as Little John, who has been secretly living as Edward with a wife named Margaret Catty Breen and their daughter, Little Margaret Faith Delaney, for some time. Skarsgård's execution of Little John is not the towering, jolly persona we are accustomed to. Here, his voice is filled with a menacing, growling bass, and he almost comes off feral, like an animal always ready to bite someone's throat. But a tragedy befalls the two men, leaving Robin intensely wounded and on the brink of death. He finds healing on an island priory where Sister Brigid, Jodie Comer, tends to his wounds, and it's in her care when Sarnowski's film begins to find a voice. Michael Sarnowski and Hugh Jackman design an ill tempered outlaw thematically. Everything begins to come into focus as the story confronts the demons of an outlaw who made horrific choices for the greater good. As he lies there suffering in wounds, Sister Brigid refuses to let him find death. From this point, the film shifts from violence to a character study of a man who decides to stop running from his enemies and himself. Robin is not only running from those who seek to slay him as a legend with a deadly bow, he is also running from the decades of lives he has taken. And the role could easily be one of Hugh Jackman's best performances since possibly The Fountain. Unlike Logan, which resembles the death of Robin Hood, Jackman's portrayal of Robin is cold and unpleasant. One can see that he might have been charismatic in a past life, but what remains is a blistery personality. For any actor, being asked to play an unlikable main character is challenging. But Jackman succeeds. Robin's cold, grizzled aesthetic matches the film's visual framework. Cinematographer Pat Scola, Pig Sing Sing, gives the movie a hazy, grayed out look that perfectly resembles Jackson's overgrown, aged beard. There are long sweeping shots of Ireland's mountains that feel wondrous to take in. The breathtaking cinematography is only enhanced by the folk inspired score from Jim Geddy, which easily made the experience feel like a Ridley Scott period drama from the early 2000s. The movie itself almost feels like the movie Scott planned to make with Russell Crowe, where Robin was pitched as the villain before Scott threw the concept away for a safer vision. The death of Robin Hood is a beautifully made and intentionally unpleasant like Sarnowski's film Pig. His pacing in The Death of Robin Hood moves at its own rhythm with little regard for whether the audience can handle a slow burn. With Pig, the careful pacing was more impactful because Nicolas Cage's character has to slowly peel away the layers of a mystery surrounding his stolen pig. Furthermore, Pig's pacing was rewarded with moments of surprising tenderness. With the death of Robin Hood, the slow burn appeal often feels more like a bug than a feature. The film does reward in sections during the back half. Still, the combination of mean spirited violence and extremely dark themes made the first half challenging, especially with the unhurried narrative. The experience inspires complex feelings, especially with how everything unfolds. The first section is patient, aggressively violent, and unsettling with its depiction of 13th century violence. The added layer of misery Robin displays almost makes watching the opening feel like a game of survivor for the viewer. Yet at the same time, the final 45 minutes are a deeply poetic, emotional, and beautifully realized vision of Robin's last days. Overall, the death of Robin Hood is the bleakest and most brutal adaptation of the iconic character. Still, Sarnowski's vision is also a heart wrenching poetic interpretation of the ending of a legendary character. The film is beautifully made, but it's not an easy recommendation. Number 6. The church killed Robin Hood. At least that's how the stories go. There are a few different versions of the early modern English ballad Robin Hood's Death. In most of them, the fatigued outlaw seeks his cousin, head nun of the Kirklees Priory, to perform the common middle age healing practice of bloodletting. And in all of those, she betrays him, releasing too much blood from his veins. The dying hero refuses to take revenge on his relative, citing his own Christian belief, and asks his companion, Little John, to administer a layperson's form of last rites. In later versions of the tale, Robin Hood dies shooting one last arrow. Its landing spot marks his supposed burial site in England's Kirklees today. Director Michael Sarnowski reimagines these scenes in The Death of Robin Hood, starring Hugh Jackman. Spoilers ahead. The film is bleak, no roosters crooning Oodalali to be found here, yet the story's Christian themes persist. In a surprising adaptation of the original tale, Sarnowski offers a thoughtful depiction of a church community trying to heal a broken man, body and soul that is until its end. Redemption is familiar territory for Sarnowski. In his debut film Pig, Nicolas Cage plays a sorrowful former master chef, also named Robin, searching for the beloved truffle hunting swine that was stolen from him. Although marketed as a John Wick esque beatdown thriller, Pig shows its grizzled lead, demonstrating remarkable acts of mercy and love. He literally turns the other cheek. He makes meals for his foes. This Robin Hood, at least at the film's inception, would never. He and Little John, Bill Skarsgård, are wicked beyond compare. Just a few minutes in, Robin rejects the noble heroism ascribed to him in folktales, describing the stories as lies upon lies. He's killed so many people he's lost count. Brutal violence defines this first act. Little John bludgeons a man to death to steal his bread. He rips off a man's jaw, taking revenge for the death of his wife. Robin kills men, women, and children. He buries a girl in a nameless grave and shoots an innocent boy as he flees. The two crave a mighty battle and not much else. Weird, occasional moments of piety appear amid the bloodshed. Before trying to kill Robin, one of his eventual victims appeals to Christ. Little John, who has learned something of God from his wife, prays occasionally. Preparing for a larger battle against the two vigilantes, a sorrowful family asks for forgiveness, and then a detour. Little John takes Robin, nearly killed in battle, to the priory of St. Clement. Tired of his blood-stained life, though not repentant, Robin wants to die. But Prioress Brigid Jodie Comer refuses his request. Her seaside convent is an idyllic haven for orphans, the sick, the widowed, and other vulnerable outcasts. In the original text, Robin functions as a noble outlaw resisting the institutional church's corruption. Sarnowski inverts the roles. This Robin says he has never prayed a prayer in his life, and Brigid steps in as a kind hearted caretaker. Though she is not above reproach, exhibiting a subtle fascination with paganism and magic, and taking part in a startling sexual scene. Still, it's Brigid who at least references the gospel in conversation with Robin. In an early bloodletting session, she recounts the tale of Paul's conversion on the road to Damascus. Later, she prays with Robin and recites Christ's comforting words in John 14:1-4. Do not let your hearts be troubled. You believe in God, believe also in me. My Father's house has many rooms. If that were not so, would I have told you that I am going there to prepare a place for you? And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come back and take you to be with me, that you also may be where I am. You know the way to the place where I am going. Keeping his identity secret, Robin heals from his wounds and spends most of the film in thoughtful discussion with other members of the community. A leprous man becomes a new friend. In one of their talks, the man alludes to Roman philosopher and theologian Boethius, who found comfort in his imprisonment and torture by retaining his knowledge and love of God. It is never too late to find peace, Robin's interlocutor insists. On his deathbed, the man reveals that he knows the outlaw's past, and yet, he says, we seem to have found another life. As Robin regains strength, his behavior changes. He uses his murderous skill set to hunt game. He becomes a loving father figure for Margaret, Little John's orphan daughter, and he never returns to his violent ways. When a boy arrives at the convent to avenge his brothers, Robin sends him home to his remaining family members. All blood debts are paid. I wish the film ended here, but Robin Hood must die, and his death is morally fraught. Robin, as it turns out, has a history with Bridget. He burned her husband and children alive, a few of the many faceless deaths he enacted. When he confesses to her, he is willing to let her kill him. She proceeds to bloodletting but stops before he dies. Brigid owes Robin for her ability to show compassion to others. She said her sorrow has been sanctifying. Offered mercy, Robin then asks the unthinkable. Assist him in his suicide, he pleads. Finish the job. Heal me, he says, like pruning a flower. In the end, the film remains faithful to the ballad. The prioress bleeds Robin to death, and little Margaret shoots his final arrow from the window. The church still kills Robin Hood, this time by euthanasia. I felt utter disgust as the credits rolled. Hanging from the cross, Christ told a nameless believing thief, truly I tell you, today you will be with me in paradise. Luke 23:43. But according to this film, some villains are too far gone for such an encounter. Director Sarnowski calls Robin Hood's end a mercy killing. It's not. If only Robin had kept trudging that road to Damascus, if only he had seen where his repentance could take him. Number 7. Michael Sarnowski is 3 for 3. The director who gave us the quietly devastating pig and the tense, cerebral A Quiet Place. Day 1 returns with The Death of Robin Hood, starring Hugh Jackman. It's probably his most ambitious film yet, and arguably his most uncompromising. It is bleak, brutal, and beautiful in equal measure, and strips one of history's most beloved legends down to his rawest, most human bones. It doesn't always land the way it should, but when it does, it hits hard. Forget the green tights, the merry men, and the triumphant heroics. Sarnowski's The Death of Robin Hood is a grim, somber, and melancholic tragedy that challenges your image of the English legend. This is a film soaked in mud, regret, and moral complexity, a deconstruction that asks what happens when the myth confronts the man and the man is running out of time. The film opens with a first act that catches you completely off guard. It is brutal, visceral, and shockingly violent. We get an action heavy gut punch that establishes the film's unforgiving world with tremendous confidence. Sarnowski directs these sequences with raw intensity and the exceptional cinematography creates a world far removed from any traditional Robin Hood adaptation. The production design, costume design, makeup, and editing are all top notch, immersing you entirely in a medieval England that feels genuinely dangerous and lived in. At the center of it all is Hugh Jackman, delivering what is unquestionably one of his career best performances. Weathered, rugged, and radiating a gravitas that only comes from a performer operating at full capacity, Jackman carries the film's emotional and physical weight with remarkable commitment. He plays Robin Hood as a flawed mortal man, choosing how to face his inevitable end. Sarnowski makes you hate the character before slowly, poignantly revealing a path toward redemption. Bill Skarsgård is genuinely convincing as Little John, and every scene he occupies crackles with an energy that leaves you wanting considerably more of him. Jodie Comer is solid but ultimately underutilized, less a fault of her performance, which she handles with characteristic ease, and more a failing of how her character is written on the page. Once the ferocious momentum of the first act subsides, the death of Robin Hood transitions into a somber character study that, while admirable in intent, loses considerable steam in its second act. The narrative burden becomes almost entirely Jackman's to carry, and while he does so with his best efforts, the screenplay doesn't always provide him enough to work with. It grows heavy and slow, and the spark that might have elevated this into a genuine masterpiece never quite ignites. The film is rich with poignant introspection and a heartfelt exploration of redemption, and the screenplay is often genuinely moving. But it is missing the emotional gut punches and intense sequences that would have made the second half as impactful as the first. The climax delivers and earns its weight, but the journey there tests patience at times. Sarnowski does have a history of delivering devastating knockout punches at the end and does so here as well. The death of Robin Hood very much feels like a prestige autumn release, and its June placement feels tonally strange for a film this profound and unrelenting. Awards traction may be difficult to predict, and mainstream box office success also seems unlikely. But none of that diminishes what Sarnowski has achieved, a bold, refreshing, and genuinely unique reimagining of a timeless legend anchored by a towering Hugh Jackman performance that deserves to be remembered come year's end.